Hello and welcome to the Majlis, the podcast by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, focusing on Central Asia. I am Mohammed Tahir, your host here in Washington, D.C. So we are again in Tajikistan for the second week in a row, and this time we are here to discuss the circumstances of the killing of 4 foreign tourists in Tajikistan over the weekend and the follow-up developments since. There are many intriguing questions, but a very few answers. As such that despite the attack claimed by ISIS, Tajik authorities insist that it is the job of their political foes, Islamic Revival Party of Tajikistan and Iran. Both of them denied any involvement. And government also doesn't want anyone to talk about the ISIS connection. So today we are here to discuss what really happened, why it matters, and what's ahead. To discuss all these, I'm joined by Jeremy Ludi, journalist and the editor of Asia by Africa, an online publication. He is joining us from Canada today. Tahir Safarov, journalist and the editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Tajik service, is with us. And Edward Lemon, postdoctoral fellow at the Harriman Institute and the author of a recent booklet called Pathways to Violent Extremism, Evidence from Tajik Recruits to Islamic State. And Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owazi, is with us along Tahir Safarov in Prague. Thank you very much, colleagues, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice to have you. So, Tahir, let's start with you then. I have a couple of reality check questions at the beginning. So, what we know so far is that on July 29th, in the Dangara region of Tajikistan, a group of foreign tourists first hit by car, then stabbed by knives. As a result, 4 of them killed, 3 injured. The incident followed by a gunfight between security forces and suspected individuals. As a result, 3 of them killed and 1 arrested. Anything to add to this?
The attack was really horrible, and Tajik prosecutor said that after ramming the car, people came out and attacked the tourist with knives. Also, they had access, and after that, there is the picture of the dead American guy who authorities said that was attacked by Axis. And there is conflicting reports, and after 3 days of statements which was published by Tajik Interior Ministry, in the last one by Tajik prosecutor, there is no statements, and government doesn't want to talk about it more. And we just see the different statements from various bodies like NGOs or local state bodies in Tajikistan that they are blaming Tajik Islamic Party of the attack, but there is no reaction from the Tajik government about the video which was published by Daesh, and also nothing were heard after that. And we are waiting, and we don't know if they will say something.
So you mentioned this video, Tahir. So what do we know about the identity of those who have allegedly committed this crime? And are they the same people who are shown on the ISIS's video?
Yes, they resemble the dead bodies, which the photo of that people were published on Tajik Interior Ministry website. And our colleague was also in the region, and we talked to father of one of them. He said that this is his son. He recognized his son, and he said that he didn't know that he was in Tajikistan. He came back to Tajikistan from Russia 2 days before the attack, and his father even wasn't aware of that. And our colleagues are working on it, and it's really very complicated because we don't know the whole information. We just know that the Tajik Interior Ministry say that some of them were member of Islamic Party, but as you said, they are denying these claims that these people were member of the Islamic Renaissance Party. So there's a lot of conflicting report, and we are working on details to find out who was these guys. And we talked to mom of one of them, but he was just taken away by security men. When my colleague was finishing the interview, they just took her away to interrogate.
What would the parents would say about the allegations made by the authorities that they were behind this killing and all these things? How they would describe that?
Well, the father of the guy who was killed did not talk with our colleague. He just said that he was shocked And as every parent he said that he doesn't believe that his son could commit such crime.
You know, I also have to mention this. I think Tahir, your reporter, was on the ground briefly, and he, as you mentioned, he spoke to locals and the parents of some of those who were accused of committing this crime before your reporter was detained and forcibly taken to Dushanbe. And I think his electronic materials were also deleted by the security forces. Tahir, describe us, what kind of place is this Dangara?
Dangara, where it's a big district and where Tajik president was born, and it's like a big valley. And since really I haven't been there, but it's like we can say that the people in that region is not conservative and not religious, and the place where tragedy happened, it's an open place. But there is a small village a little bit far from the road, and some security sources told us that this car was following the tourists from the Kulab region or even far from other places where these tourists went. So we don't know when they started to follow these people, but they try to find the place where they can attack and run away as quickly as possible.
That's interesting. So, colleagues, Tahir is full of information, so feel free to ask any question you have to him. But to follow up this, Edward, so your thoughts on what we were talking about, what Tahir has just said, anything striking out?
Yeah, well, I think the sort of shocking attack on Sunday is significant on at least 3 levels. So, seemingly the claim by ISIS putting out the video that, as Tahir said, resembled where the individuals in the video resembled the bodies that were put on the website of the Interior Minister. The link to ISIS is seemingly credible, and that will be the first attack in Central Asia, terrorist attack with a credible link to ISIS. You know, there have been plots that have been claimed to have been foiled by governments in the past, but you know the evidence for that link's never been put forward. So it's significant on that level. I think it's also significant because most of the terrorist attacks we've seen in the region in recent years have targeted security services and government offices. Very few attacks have actually singled out civilians. Civilians have been killed, but they've often been killed sort of as part of a collateral damage. So I think it's significant that this attack specifically targeted civilians. And I think third, it's significant that they specifically targeted Western civilians. We've seen Western embassies, or we've seen the Israeli embassy and the Chinese embassy targeted in the past. We've seen aid workers kidnapped in Tajikistan in the last years of the civil war, but we've not really seen very often sort of Western tourists targeted within the region. So I think the attack was shocking. I think it's not surprising. I guess a number of people have been predicting that this was a possibility for a number of years, especially since the emergence of ISIS and the recruitment of Central Asians to ISIS. But obviously, we have to hope it's not a precedent going forward.
Definitely, we are going to talk about in details what does it mean a little bit later. But coming back to the actuality of this event, Jeremy, maybe we can invite you here to talk about this. So, the attackers attacked these tourists with knives, and the follow-up fight with the alleged criminals turned into a gunfight. So if they had a gun, why they didn't use it in the first place?
Well, we're not really maybe sure if they had guns in the first place, given the sort of sketchy details that's surrounding the situation, whether that actually occurred or that's what the Tajik ministries are saying. My guess would be that, given that they're in a car and the individuals are on bikes, it might in a certain way be more efficient or more, let's say, in a more visceral commitment on their part to the attack and to the ideology to use knives. And we've seen knife use in various other attacks across the world that people that are linked to ISIS or that ISIS claims responsibility for. So I think that by using knives as opposed to guns, it would perhaps give them a greater link to ISIS, or perhaps in the views in the if for others looking at the event could therefore substantiate the claims that yes, this is an ISIS attack more than if they had used guns, and people would have assumed that they were highwaymen or ne'er-do-wells of a different sort.
Tahir, just to little bit expand this, obviously you take with a certain amount of caution what the authority says about this, but after the clash with the alleged criminals, did the authorities also say anything about the amount of ammunition that they confiscated from that region?
Let me correct you. They say that they did not find any like firearms, and they just attacked them with axes and knives. So we don't know details about it. They say that we have found the axes there and also knives. There was no mention about the firearms, but Tajik authorities said that one of them attacked the security guys when they called them to surrender, and when they opened the door in that farm, the guys attacked them with axe. That's why they shot him dead. So we did not see any information about firearms. We saw information about knives and axes.
Okay. And Bruce, now the government blames Islamic Revival Party of Tajikistan and Iran despite they rejected any involvement and ignores ISIS's claim despite they claim that they did it. So what's your take? What's going on here?
Well, clearly the release of that videotape by ISIS that showed that it was actually people in Tajikistan, the Tajik government must have been incredibly surprised by that. I'm sure they didn't expect that was coming. They resorted to their old enemy right away. I mean, really, it had barely been 24 hours since the attack, and they already were pointing the finger at the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan. We've seen this again and again with anything that goes wrong in Tajikistan anymore. I wouldn't be surprised if the Tajik government blame them for drought or something like that at this point. So it wasn't surprising that they picked them, and it also wasn't surprising, of course, that they said that Iran was helping them out, because we know that Tajikistan's relations with Iran have gotten worse and worse over the last few years, and then of course it was just earlier this year that the Tajik government all of a sudden dragged out these files from the 1990s and said the Iranian government was behind the assassinations of key political figures during the civil war. And why they waited 20 years to come up with this, I have no idea at all. But certainly, as I said, when the video came out on the Amaq ISIS site, I think that's part of the reason that the Tajik government hadn't said anything, because they're trying to figure out now what their story is going to be, because they made it sound like they had learned everything that they needed to know about this already, and the investigation was practically already done, and they had already found out who the perpetrators were and what the motivations were. And now, of course, their whole story has been pretty much dismantled by the release of this video. It's some of the things that they're not saying too, or that they haven't said, I thought were kind of interesting too. And of course, Edward would know this, but Edward had said early on Twitter that this bore the hallmarks of this kind of ISIS attack. We've seen this not just in Tajikistan, of course, but using a vehicle to hit people and things like that. But the video, I thought, for me, when I was looking at it, because they're speaking in Russian, but it's very bad Russian, and immediately you get the idea that these were surely migrant laborers who had been in Russia. And of course, this is one of the recruiting areas, again, Edward could tell you, for groups like ISIS. So everything started to add up more on the ISIS version of having committed the crime. And at the same time, the government's accusations against the Islamic Renaissance Party in Iran just seem to evaporate.
Yeah. To refute this, what the authority is claiming, Bruce, what kind of evidence that we have? Like the video, one thing that came out from Amaq. We also know that ISIS also exaggerates their role in attacks like that. So how we are sure that what the authorities are saying is wrong and what ISIS is saying is correct?
Well, for one thing, ISIS had the video. Yeah. Right? So these guys had filmed it before they carried out the attack and managed to transmit it to people in ISIS. Yeah. Now whether they were cultivating these people for a long time, that's speculation. I don't know. They might have just joined in the last 10 days or something. But they did manage to get this video to them, obviously to be released posthumously, or maybe they thought that would get away with it. But in any case, after the attack, this was supposed to be released. So they had connected with them somehow or another. And again, this is just a standard would-be ISIS member style of attack here. They say it's with things that are readily available to almost anyone. It's not a sophisticated attack at all. It's like I said, there's knives, axes. You can get those on any farm, and lots of people have cars. And that is, a characteristic of the kind of attacks that ISIS sympathizers carry out in different parts of the world.
Edward, do you want to say anything on that?
I definitely agree that bears the hallmarks of ISIS attacks. I mean, it brings to mind attacks, as Jeremy said, in Europe, the attack in New York by Saifullah Saipov in October last year. And as Bruce said, the use of these unsophisticated methods make these attacks quite easy to launch and difficult to prevent.
So why would ISIS do this in Tajikistan?
Well, I think that's obviously a difficult question to answer, but for a long time there's been talk of ISIS, or the desire of ISIS to target Central Asia, to target the former Soviet Union. We've had obviously ISIS leaders calling for attacks in the former Soviet Union, in Russia, in the lead up to the World Cup. And I think it's important for them symbolically to show that despite the setbacks in the caliphate in recent years, that there is still a capacity to launch attacks in Central Asia, and it's a sort of show of strength on their part, or at least an attempted show of strength.
Okay, so if it was indeed ISIS, so what does this really mean to Tajikistan, and why it matters, and what we should be looking ahead? We will continue Majlis podcast discussing these and many other questions very shortly. First, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia podcast, we are discussing the circumstances surrounding the recent terrorist attack on foreign tourists in Tajikistan and what does it mean to the country. Joining me in the discussion are Jeremy Ludi, journalist and the editor of Asia by Africa, an online publication; Tohir Safarov, journalist and editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Tajik service; Edward Lemon, postdoctoral fellow at the Harriman Institute and author of a recent report called Pathways to Violent Extremism, Evidence from Tajik Recruits to Islamic State; Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owazi. I am Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, colleagues. So, to continue the same discussion. So, yes, there are lots of questions yet, but the fact that 4 foreign tourists were killed in an ISIS-style and an ISIS-claimed attack in Tajikistan, the likelihood is that it's indeed committed by ISIS. So, how significant is this, and what does this mean? Jeremy?
Well, frankly, in some ways, it's surprising that maybe it hasn't happened sooner, given the numbers of Tajik citizens that have gone to the Middle East or North Africa to fight with ISIS. There's a reason that Tajikistan is the main or the largest exporter of suicide bombers for ISIS outside of Syria and Iraq. And we saw this previously with the defection of Gurumad Halimov, the U.S.-trained Special Forces commander with links to the Tajik government. That was a very high-profile defection, which surely acted as a rallying cry for others that were dissatisfied with, the very anti-Islam, pro-secular stance that the Tajik government has taken in recent years. When a country forcibly shaves 13,000 of its citizens, you realize that there's issue at hand here, and perhaps it's not being addressed in the best way possible. So, as Bruce and Edward mentioned, with ISIS on the back foot in other parts of the world, you have more people returning. The fact that these people returned from Russia, which again is, as been previously mentioned, is a recruiting zone, through Russian social media like Vkontakte for ISIS. That what we were seeing is the chickens coming home to roost in a certain sense, where you have all these people that, because of the poverty in Tajikistan, because of government repression and so on and so forth, and the banning and then the sort of ostracization of the Renaissance Party that left and heeded the call of ISIS a couple of years ago, now returning. And, the original sentiments and resentment that they had against the government is now fueling attacks in their own home country now.
Edward, do you think that there's a connection between this increasing repression locally and the attack?
Yeah, I think it's obviously difficult to say at this stage, given that we've only managed to, Eurasian Net have spoken to the family of 2 of the brothers who were killed, who were involved in the attack, and obviously, as Tahir says, Radio Free Europe's managed to speak to families of some of the other people. So it's difficult for us to see at this point to build up a picture of precisely why these individuals led this attack. But certainly it's true to say that in ISIS's Tajik language sort of recruitment, historically it has obviously utilized and taken advantage of the government's sort of anti-Islamic policies that Jeremy's just mentioned. So certainly the repression by the government has played into the recruitment processes historically. So this is possibly the case. Possibly the case here as well.
Bruce, how do you see the timing?
Well, it's correct to say that ISIS is moving its operation. We know that it's upped its game a little bit in Afghanistan. It's always been extremely unclear what kind of numbers we're talking about. The strange thing is that ISIS doesn't seem to have a presence by the Tajik border. So, the people that were in the north that claimed they were Daesh were all in Juzjan, which is way over by
No,
Turkmenistan.
they are also present in Badakhshan and Kunduz. Both of them has a border with Tajikistan, Bruce.
ISIS is there,
Yeah.
or just the Taliban?
ISIS.
I'd heard that the local Taliban in those areas had been pretty effective in keeping them out. I know that they're in eastern Afghanistan.
I think for a long time they had a entire district under their control in Badakhshan. For instance, I don't know what's the states of that, but yeah, they are certainly present there.
Well, in any case, like I said, we know they're there in Afghanistan. We don't know the numbers. But again, I don't think that even though they might be coming back to Afghanistan, again, I don't think that this Afghanistan really had much of a part in this whatsoever. Though I'm not sure there were any orders given for these guys. It's like a lot of the people that carry out these kind of attacks. I think they, from watching videos in places or getting on the internet, they just came up with this on their own and kind of informed somebody that was in that terrorist organization that they were thinking about carrying out this attack. Now, Tahir can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all the guys involved in this attack were not only migrant laborers, but they worked at the same factory, didn't they?
Two of them, I think,
in Russia.
Two of them were working together, but others did not. Like one of them worked in a different part of the Russia, and another guy in different part of Russia.
Okay.
So there is still a lot of information about their connection. So we don't know, but you are right. Two of them were working together.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, it seems like they probably inspired or.
Bruce, can I just follow up on Tahir on that? I'm sorry for breaking. Tahir, do you know did they ever been to Syria or they just came from Russia to Tajikistan? What's the connection there?
We don't know. According to information that we got, so any of them were not in Syria. And we just know that the guy, Tajik interior minister, said that one who ordered the attack was a member of Islamic Party who was in Iran, and also another one who carried out attack was in Iran, and also. But we don't know if they traveled to Syria or not. We don't know. We just know that two of them were in Russia. Still, there are a lot of information we have to gather and need a clear picture to make the yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Bruce. So go ahead.
No. I mean, obviously, so with ISIS kind of winding down their operation in Iraq and Syria because they're being beaten back everywhere. It's the nature of these kind of groups to try to find a new place to shelter and kind of try to re-expand their operation. And it's been mentioned that we know that they've had people come from Central Asia to join them in the Middle East, and they've tried recruiting in the past. I mean, they've sent messages in Kyrgyz and Kazakh and Tajik and Uzbek, hoping to catch people back in Central Asia on the internet, which is, of course, so heavily screened to varying degrees in the countries out there that I don't know how many people could actually access that kind of stuff on the internet. But And again, it's kind of it speaks to the video that we did see that they were why they were speaking in Russian. I guess because the only reason you could say is they were looking for recruits, a wider recruiting audience, and that's why they were talking in Russian. That also shows that it probably wasn't the Islamic Renaissance Party. If theoretically the Islamic Renaissance Party was trying to get new recruits to do some act of violence, you would have expected they would have been speaking in Tajik to the local people in Tajikistan and not speaking in broken Russian. To elaborate what they were trying to do there in Tajikistan. So, it's significant that it's the first attack that we can say is definitely an ISIS attack in Central Asia. I feel very sorry for the people that live in Tajikistan and more generally in Central Asia, because the response of the governments there to these kind of things is usually, if you have to arrest 1,000 people just to get to the one guy that you really want to get who's the problem. I haven't seen it yet in Tajikistan, but it's only a few days down the road, and I can't help but think that that's what's coming.
And if may I add, as Bruce said, they were speaking in broken Russian. So it means that there are a lot of information, like a lot of propaganda information in Russian available online. So Tajik people even, so when they go to Russia, they start to watch this kind of material in Russian. So there are a lot of information in Tajik, propaganda information, Tajik from ISIS, but there are like 1,000 videos or other audio material still available online. So that's why I think that they just watched too much, like all that kind of propaganda material in Russian, because they could talk in Tajik and they say the same thing. I think it was like some religious thing that they were reading. So it was in Russian and broken Russian.
Edward,
if I can jump in quick.
Sure.
Well, I mean, I think that another point to look at with the use of broken Russian too is that, knowing that you're making this video and that it's going to be released and shared around in the aftermath of the attack, with Russia being sort of the lingua franca of Central Asia, I think you can maximize your impact a lot more that way, as opposed to just speaking in Tajik, which you might be more comfortable in, but will only reach a small, percentage of your potential audience.
You are right. It was like a propaganda video, which...
Right, and that again reinforces the fact it's not the Islamic Renaissance Party, because they would have no need to have a message taped or to try to get stir up trouble using Russian as as the language.
And it was recorded in a place where the most strategic hydropower plant in Tajikistan is located. They even choose this place to show that we can be here, even under, as we say, under your nose. So it is like close. And one of that guys were walking in Norak power plant, which is one of the biggest and hydropower plant in Tajikistan and the main source of energy.
That's very interesting. Edward, we have to find out a lot more before being very clear about what happened and why it happened. But so far what we know is the likelihood is that it is done by ISIS. So what's your reading in terms of this connection between these individuals, the real ISIS in Middle East or in Afghanistan?
The connection between
these individuals? Yeah, let me put it in this way. Was it kind of what we call in the West is lone wolf attack, or there was a kind of organization behind it?
Yeah, well, I think, as Bruce mentioned, the fact that ISIS already had the video shows that there was previous contact in a way that we didn't see, for example, in the New York attack in October, right, where we know we did, obviously, Saipov had some connections with ISIS before the attack. But in this case, specifically, it does appear that they've had at least some basic level of contact before the attack took place. But obviously, speculating beyond that at this point is difficult to say. But it does seem as though they all came under the influence of ISIS propaganda. Whether that was through a great deal of direct contact or not is it's too early to tell.
And also, as Tahir was saying, that where the video was recorded in front of this huge infrastructure, then the incident where it took place, the killing took place, Dangara, the birthplace of Tajik president, Tahir, you said. So, Edward, explain this. Is there any hidden message there?
I mean, I think it's possible. I think it also, makes sense because if you're driving from Kulob to Dushanbe or Horog to Dushanbe, as I think they were, the road goes right through Dangara, right? It's an area, as Tahir says, that's it's relatively easy to launch the attack. Now, was there a sort of message going to the president? Well, I think especially given the other video was videoed in Nurek, perhaps there was. It's certainly a plausible hypothesis.
I think whether there's a message or not is based on if and how long they were following the cyclists, if they were just coincidentally in a convenient neighborhood for this attack to occur, or if, having followed them from elsewhere, as we discussed earlier, they then decided there specifically to strike for its, propaganda value.
Also the recording, they could record that in any place, but they choose that location where the infrastructure could be seen through the lens of camera. But anyway, and going forward, Bruce, earlier you were saying that so far you have not seen any major response by the authorities on this. Obviously, there were blames and claims and accusations. But going forward, what are you looking at in terms of government's response and also in terms of this unprecedented attack likely conducted by ISIS?
Well, I think you have to look at this, at least there's two parts to this. One is the domestic and one is the international. Domestically, like I said, I can't see any other way this is going to end up than with a crackdown. Historically, that's been the way it goes in Central Asia. Every time there's an attack like this, whether it was the Tashkent bombings in February 1999 or the appearance of the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan or the Andajan violence, that stuff was all outside Tajikistan, but the response was always the same, where you just start rounding up people everywhere you go. Even Kyrgyzstan when they've had problems with this, they've ended up detaining hundreds of people. In Kyrgyzstan's case, most of them probably were released later. But the government errs on the side of caution or paranoia and just, starts rounding up as many people as they can until they finally get to the ones they want. But in the meantime, of course, a lot of people that don't belong in jail end up in jail, and a lot of people in the countries are disaffected, and actually become opponents of the government because of these kind of crackdowns. So it's annoying, and even worse than that, I mean, it's horrible to even think that it's coming. Now, from the international perspective, Tajikistan is, of course, going to use this as much as possible to say, yes, we are under threat, and we need all the money and help, military and security help that we can get. They've been saying that forever. It's amazing this could happen after all these years, with the Chinese giving them money and security help, and Russia being there and giving them money and security help, and really even Western countries, at least with the security help, they give them advice, they help them build border posts, all run training courses with security forces and with the local police to try to prevent this kind of stuff. And after all this time, 5 young guys are able to pull this off. But the Tajik government is going to capitalize on this to the maximum possible and try to say, look, we need more aid. How long they're going to try to hold out this narrative of the Islamic Renaissance Party being responsible, I don't know, because it really undercuts their whole story.
Yeah.
And I think the Western governments are going to have a lot of questions about the Tajik authorities' version of events here. So Tajikistan might not be able to count on so much Western help with this as they would have otherwise. But like I said, there's China and Russia, I think, will be happy to give them further guarantees of security aid in the future.
Okay. Let me take Tahir and Jeremy, your thoughts on this very quickly. So what would you guys be looking at going forward?
Well, in terms of the international perspective, I'd be looking at what China does, because you have Tajikistan bordering Xinjiang, which is a very high priority for the Chinese government with the Uyghurs.
Yeah.
There's 40,000 ethnic Tajiks in Xinjiang, and then there's also ethnic Uyghurs in Tajikistan. So this porous border notion is something that really scares the Chinese government. So if there's things happening in Tajikistan, you can be sure that Beijing will take a closer look, and how that plays into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and which Tajikistan is a part of, and the regional anti-terrorism structure, or RATS. We'll have to see, but I do think that this gives, like I guess we said, China and to a certain extent Russia another opportunity for greater leverage in Tajikistan.
Tahir?
And as Bruce said, so I also expect that there would be more people detained, or maybe most of them will be accused that they did hide the crime or did not inform the police that some kind of like suspicious thing is going. So, and also I think there would be more crackdown online, maybe even blocking some social media portals or networks where Tajik authorities say that this attack was coordinated, and I think there would be more crackdown on even social media users, and sometimes, so even we heard that young guys were imprisoned for listening to Muhyiddin Kabiri, head of Tajik Islamic Party, and also sharing some videos. And also I think the returning migrants would have more trouble, and there would be more screening and more questioning. So it has a lot of far-reaching consequences for Tajikistan.
Okay, just to conclude, Edward, feel free to add your thoughts on look ahead. And also, finally, I wanted to ask this question because that you've been to Tajikistan more than me, obviously, and I was also planning a visit early next year. And a couple of my friends are, in fact, headed to Tajikistan very soon. Now that this tragic event took place, is there anything visitors should be cautious about?
Yeah, well, I think obviously the tragedy is the tragic events are a shame for Tajikistan. It's obviously declared the year of tourism this year, and I think the tourism figure said that tourism has already been up 4 times in the first 6 months of the year, I think. So, I think a lot of people will be put off by the events. I think it's, too early to tell whether this was just an isolated incident, and hopefully it was. But I think a lot of people will potentially think twice about traveling there. At the moment, as the US Embassy has sort of put out its statements, there's no specific evidence that there's a broader threat, but then obviously there's maybe not specific evidence that there's not a broader threat. So I think a lot of people will unfortunately be put off traveling to Tajikistan, even though it's such a beautiful country with hospitable people, and it's a really amazing place to travel in. But I think this will be, along with the other things that people have just said, this will be another potentially long-term challenge for the government now to rebuild its image.
Okay. With this note, thank you, Dr. Edward Lemon, postdoctoral fellow at the Herman Institute. And also big thanks goes to Jeremy Ludi, journalist and editor of Asia by Africa, Tahir Safarov, journalist and editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Tajik service, and Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog called Kishlak Owazi. Thank you, colleagues, for your time and thoughts today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was very nice to have you. And this is it from me, Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia podcast. Until next week, bye-bye.